This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then notes on resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month.
I mean, in general, when you think about like community and friendship, those things are quite important for wellness. If I am lonely, then it's a lot harder for me to feel like safe and comfortable and like I can ask for the support I need and I can get the support I need because I have people who are willing to offer it.
Hello, and welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chelinsky, and today we have another episode in our series on wellness at work. And I'm talking to Aaron Chasan. He's the founder of Thread, a human resources technology company that connects coworkers based on shared interests. We had a conversation about the importance of friendships at work, why that matters to the individual and to the organization. And I think you're really going to find this interesting. Thanks for listening. Hi, Aaron. I'm so excited that you and I are chatting today. Thanks for being here.
Of course, super excited to be here.
Well, before we dig into the topic, one question I like to ask all my guests is, if you could have dinner with any historical figure, however you define that, who would it be and why?
Okay, I've been thinking a lot about this. It's hard to come up with somebody who is both like interesting and like
Mhm.
we didn't later discover that they were problematic in some way.
Yes.
The person that I have landed on is Frederick Olmsted. Do you know who Olmsted is? Architect?
Oh, the landscape architect.
Yeah, I read a couple of years ago and got like into Olmsted because I thought he was very interesting. Like one of the first conservationists, also just designed these beautiful parks like Central Park and Chicago State Fair, like landscape architecture back in the day. And I don't know, he was like someone who was really interested in conservationism and like creating beautiful spaces while others were interested in like giant buildings that were super profitable.
Yes.
And so I think that he would just be a fascinating person to talk to. And I would love to kind of ask him, like, okay, you can design a city from scratch. What does that look like? I think it'd be really cool.
That would be cool. And I wonder how different it would look from the cities that we have now.
Yeah, I would imagine quite different.
Well, he designed the emerald necklace here in Boston. So
Oh, he did?
I am familiar with some of his work. So I think that's great. I wish I could make it happen. I think that would be amazing. Thank you for sharing. So we are here talking about the concept of wellness at work. And you come at this from the perspective of friendship and social connectivity at work. So I guess just get us started. Why is that something that's important to be thinking about in a workplace?
There are quite a lot of reasons. The big ones that we sort of talk about are like retention and intent to stay and kind of like loyalty and like resilience and all of that. So
Mhm.
when you're well connected, you stay at the company a lot longer. The big reason is if I have a huge network and then I get a job offer for a similar role, the opportunity cost of leaving is really, really high.
Mhm.
Similarly, if I'm really well connected, I know who to go to for questions, and it's easier for me to figure stuff out and start shipping projects faster and all of that. Also, if I'm well connected, then I have this network that can support me through hard times. And so, friendship at work is obviously really important for our personal lives. Like we spend so much of our time working,
Mhm.
it would be a bummer to not have folks that we like, that we, are working with. And then also it's really important for organizations too.
Right. Well, in what ways? I mean, you mentioned it improves retention and intent to stay and maybe employee loyalty. What are some other reasons it's something that workplaces and managers and leaders should be thinking about this?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm managing a team of folks and those people are very isolated,
Mhm.
they're going to have trouble getting their work done. Like I mentioned before, are like, they don't have a lot keeping them at the company outside of maybe their basic like compensation package.
Mhm.
And so obviously you have to get that stuff right. Like before anything else, you need to get like comp right and you need to get culture right. But then after that, there are these other factors that start to really impact whether people stay and what it looks like when they are staying. And friendship is a really big one.
Mhm.
If I have these people that I trust and that I like that I'm working with, then it becomes a lot easier to do that hard work when the hard work comes.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like the concept of friendship at work and having friends at work isn't something we used to explicitly talk about.
Yeah.
Why are we thinking about it now?
Yeah, good question. When you started asking this question, I thought back to I was randomly in Munich last year on vacation, and I ran into these Americans at this like beer garden and happened to have like a mutual connection with them, which was bizarre. But then when I told them about what I did, they paused and they were, an elderly couple, and they were like, my dad would have been so shocked that that is like a career path. Like my dad, who was a miner, would have been just absolutely floored that like you can make a business out of like friends at work,
Hmm.
because the way that we look at work now is really different. I think like it used to be a lot more transactional
Hmm.
in the ways that like when we were like getting toward this 9 to 5 work week, it was transactional.
Hmm.
And like you think of things like Ford and the assembly line and all of that. And then since then, people have started to realize, like, wait a second, I spend the majority of my life working. Like, this can't just be transactional. I need to feel like fulfilled while I'm doing this, or else I'll go somewhere else where like that's possible. And so I think like that just general trend has made it something that people are willing to care about. And then the other aspect of it is that the companies that have put things like this at the forefront became more successful and attracted the best talent. And then all of the other companies that lost their talent to those ones hopefully realized that was the problem. And if they didn't, then a lot of the times, they failed.
Yes. Thank you for that. When I think about a workplace, you mentioned that one of these individuals, their parent was a minor.
Uh-huh.
When I think about workplaces, I think about the kind of workplace I think that you and I are familiar with, the office consulting firm. We're all in cubicles. There's a break room, all of the typical things. That is not what every workplace, or maybe even most workplaces, look like. Does it make a difference, this idea of friendship at work, what the workplace looks like or what type of workplace we're talking about?
Yeah, I think it does make a difference between different industries. I think that having a friend at work is more important at some types of companies than others. But I do think like there's value in it
Hmm.
regardless of the industry. Even if you're a minor,
Yes.
like it would be nice to go to work and see your like pal, your buddy before like you start. And then after work, you're like, man, that was brutal. Like I'd like to grab a drink with this person and debrief because they're the only person in my life that actually knows what I'm going through. Like, my loved ones can empathize, but they're not going through it. And so
Right.
regardless of the industry, it's important. But I also think that it would be unrealistic to say that it's equally important everywhere.
Hmm.
Like specifically in jobs where you might not have some of those other first priority needs met, like comp or like
Hmm.
if it's a really high stress environment, then it's not as important to like have a best friend at work because that's not going to change the fact that you're unhappy with the base situation.
Right.
Yeah, I think it definitely is different, but still important, everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot about mental wellness in the organizational context. And how does the concept of friendship support or maybe not support the concept of mental wellness in a workplace in particular?
I mean, in general, when you think about community and friendship, those things are quite important for wellness. If I am lonely, then it's a lot harder for me to feel safe and comfortable and like I can ask for the support I need and I can get the support I need because I have people who are willing to offer it. I have to really put myself out there if I don't know people and I have to like raise my hand for help. There's a lot of good research on this topic. I mean, Gallup's been studying the importance of a best friend at work for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And this year I did a bit of a refresh and they put out an article about best friends at work. And one of the cool things that I took away from that article was this concept of like having a best friend at work is key for navigating like hard situations and uncertain situations. Mm-hmm. And so when you have these people who are in your corner, it is easier to feel supported and well. And then that makes it easier to navigate those situations that are tough.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think about what are some things that a friendship relationship brings, like trust and that support you mentioned and feeling part of the tribe. Mm. Even just those three things are important to feeling connected to the workplace. So, well, you mentioned culture as well. And how does the company culture fit into all of this?
Yeah, like fit into wellness, resilience, friendship, all those things.
All of the above, or any of the above. Pick whichever angle you would like.
It kind of like all starts with culture. It's like the thing that leads to wellness. I kind of think about it like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
That first stage, if I'm going to use like a hierarchy of needs kind of framework, would be I need the basic ones to be met. So kind of like what I mentioned before, like I need a manager who's not toxic and I need comp that's reasonable and I need to feel good with my base situation. Mm-hmm. And all of those things are like culture things.
Yes.
Then after that, there are these extra systems and cool benefits that might help me. And that doesn't really matter if you haven't gotten the first thing right and haven't gotten your culture right. And so like culture is, I think, absolutely critical to getting any of this stuff right. And that kind of starts with leaders and setting the right example and demanding reasonable things from your people.
Right. Who knew how important Maslow's hierarchy of needs was going to be when we were studying that in Psych 101?
Yeah, back in my junior year of high school.
Exactly. Now I feel it keeps coming back to me in different ways.
Yeah.
Well, so you look at this through the lens of friendship. When you're thinking about that, how can organizations really be supportive of these kind of relationships and building that strong culture in their organizations?
Yeah. So kind of two ways that I think two things that organizations would need to think about. The first is being supportive of it kind of abstractly in the way that you've built your culture, and then also specific programs and systems and initiatives around that. So abstractly, I think some organizations need to overcome the mindset that like connectivity can be bad. If I'm really close with somebody, maybe I'm wasting my time pinging them all day. Or maybe I'm telling them how much of a raise I'm getting. And so then they're going to use that against the company. And like, that's a whole other thing. Like, I think salary transparency is super important. But anyways, I think that they need to overcome those ideas, which in my opinion are pretty antiquated. And then they should also start setting up systems for getting folks connected. If you have a hybrid company or a remote company in particular, it's a lot harder for spontaneous connection to happen. You don't run into people. You literally don't. And or at least not as often. And so that's kind of why I built my company, is to create these like an initiative like that, a program like that to solve for that. And companies obviously can like work with others like mine that have these initiatives set up to foster connectivity and to build those spontaneous interactions back. Or they can do it themselves. It's easy to start matching people up randomly, or, when a new hire starts, introduce them to 5 people at the company that you think that they get along with. Mm-hmm. And so being intentional about creating opportunities for connection is what companies need to do.
And you said the word intentional.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is, you do or don't pay attention to your culture, but you will have a company culture. So you want to pay attention, you might want to think about it and be intentional so that you're building one that's actually supportive.
Right.
For your organization and for your people. What kind of objections do you get when you're sort of talking about the work that you do People tell you we don't need this at this company.
Sometimes, most of the time, I'm not talking to those kinds of companies, to be honest. Hopefully, I haven't gotten to a conversation with them because it probably isn't a super worthwhile use of both of our time. But
Mm-hmm.
it does happen, specifically companies that are going through layoffs. A lot of the time,
Mm-hmm.
they will say, like, if we just had a layoff, it doesn't feel good to create like a wellness program because it feels like trivializing this like big situation. That's not how I feel, but I get that perspective. And they also will say, like, we just had layoffs. It's not really a bad thing if people feel isolated and leave. Just means we don't have to pay them severance, which obviously is a bummer
For many, many reasons.
for many, many reasons. And I think that that kind of overlooks the importance of like network health and what it means when people leave, and obviously cost to acquire an employee. That feels pretty short sighted to me, but that is one of the objections we get.
Right. Absolutely. And interesting to think about the concept of layoffs, and that might not be the time to be talking about this. To me, it feels like that's exactly the time to be talking about this. To be
Yeah, you've just really severed your whole network. Like you need to now build these connections again.
exactly, and you need to rebuild the connections. Oh my goodness. So I know, so you have created a program for this to help companies with this. What are some other, I don't know, maybe innovative or interesting strategies that businesses could be thinking about to be supportive of friendships in their organization?
Good question. So yeah, if you're not going to work with a company that can do connectivity like ours or the others in the space, there are a few options. One would be like creating your own program. It's like that's like possible, especially if you're doing it randomly. Another kind of cool one that I heard yesterday or the day before, a friend of mine sent me this podcast from Adam Grant talking about loneliness at work, and he was like, "I think you'll find this interesting." Obviously, one of the ideas that he mentioned, which was his kind of like out there idea, was to create like dyads or pairs of people at work.
Mhm.
When you start, that person kind of like has the same or a similar role to you, and you are both like kind of doing the same job,
Mhm.
which is cool because if one of you has to take vacation, then it's really easy to cover.
Mhm.
So that creates like ease and it creates this support system, which is really cool for resilience and for wellness. And obviously, it creates connection because you're like really in it together.
Right.
I think it's a pretty cool idea. Just like we pair people up and they are buddies and they do the same thing. I know a lot of organizations won't go for that. It feels like twice the amount of resources for one role or one amount of output.
Right.
I'm not sure. I would have to see like what the actual results would be, but I would be curious if they got done twice as much work or two and a half times as much work because they when they run into a problem, they just ask each other about it and like work through it.
Right.
So I think that would be a pretty cool idea, just like doubling up.
Okay. I like the sound of that. No, I'm also thinking about wellness in general and thinking about in an organization and how important it is to be inclusive of all of the different types of people in your organization and address their diverse needs. How does,
Mm-hmm.
what might be some challenges with building friendships at work, whether it's an official program or working with a company like yours, in making sure that we do that equitably?
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges that I was like acutely aware of when I was building my company Thread was we match people based on shared interests. That's kind of like how it works because we think that when you have something in common, you're just naturally more likely to get along with that person. And if you can figure out what you have in common, it makes that conversation really easy. It makes it easier to bond quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, something I was really concerned about was what if our algorithm has bias? Like, what if people who like sailing are just straight white rich men
Mm-hmm.
and we're just matching people up who are similar, not just in their interests, but in like their background?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like something that I've been really concerned about. Luckily, the algorithm doesn't really do that. It does create like diverse connections, which are great. But that's one of the things that I find concerning when you build things like this. You need to address that there might be bias that you've accidentally created.
Right.
If you are matching people up and you're not doing it fully randomly, like, are you matching them people who have similar last names? I hope not. Maybe you do. Things like that. And then I think the other thing that's important to consider is some of the access or some of the like topics that that are related to like diversity and accessibility that don't get mentioned as much. Specifically, like ability,
Mm-hmm.
I think is often overlooked. And so a lot of companies will do like wellness challenges, which are like walking challenges.
Yes.
And that's all well and good. People do like those and they do help. I think like ideally any sort of wellness initiative or friendship initiative or whatever should be inclusive of everybody inherently. If it's not going to be, you need to think about ways for other people that it's not inclusive for to participate.
Right.
And so like people who are not able to do a walking challenge, you need to have something else for them. And the other thing that I think is important to consider from this kind of lens is like neurodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you hope that all initiatives are accessible by nature for all neurotypes because you don't know who's neurodivergent necessarily.
Right.
And it can be really daunting to reveal that and scary. And there are a lot of really bad scenarios that have come up from people revealing that sort of thing to a company that uses it in a punitive way. You don't necessarily know who
Yes.
might not be neurotypical. And so ideally, you make it accessible for everyone. If not, you allow for mechanics that promote accessibility. So opt outs, additional mechanisms, control and customization
Right.
are some big ones that just can help pretty broadly, not just folks who might be on the spectrum or not just people who have ADHD, but like in general, if you have lots of opt out and like customization mechanics involved, then people can make the program what they need it to be.
Right. You meet them where they are. And I appreciate what you said is that we don't want to have to get into a position where people have to share what their particular situation is. And because we have seen, we know that there can be stigma, there can be other repercussions to admitting something like that in a workplace. Whether or not there should be is another question, but we know that there are. So, well, it's good to hear that you have been so thoughtful in thinking about building these connections and making sure that the algorithm is as inclusive as it can be. So we're just getting up at the end of our time, and I would love for you to share a little bit more about your company and what you do and how you got interested in it.
So how I got interested in it kind of comes back to our connection,
Mm-hmm.
Ernst & Young. So I was a people advisory services consultant at EY before I left to start Thread. And the work that I did before leaving was future of work projects. So who's going back to the office? How often? How do we make those decisions? What's fair? And one of the big takeaways from these brainstorming sessions around this was clients were really concerned about being socially connected to their colleagues and really concerned that their teams would not be connected and they would leave because of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the light bulb went off and that's when I decided to pursue it. So that's kind of the story around Thread. And then in terms of what we actually do, we create connections for coworkers based on shared interests. And I kind of talked about why we do that already. It's like a lot stickier if you have something in common with somebody. So we create those connections and then we also measure the impact of that work pretty diligently with network analysis. So we want to know who needs this support, who is isolated, who is an influencer, who is a bridge that's holding parts of the network together.
Mm-hmm.
And like, how has this program mitigated risks or like created cool opportunities for connection? And so that's kind of like the two parts of it is solving the problem and making sure that we know that it is solved.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I am so intrigued by the network analysis piece. And I just was thinking in my head back to the conversation with people who might have had layoffs and how the network grows and you could get rid of someone who is actually a bridge and someone who's really important to the network.
Right.
Not that I'm saying that's how companies need to be deciding who they're laying off, but just so curious how you could really crumble the culture and the connections if you're not really paying attention to these relationships.
Right. And it's hard to know without some sort of data, especially if the company is any larger than 50. Like, how would you know that someone is a bridge?
Right.
So, yeah, it's important to pay attention to that stuff. And there's also some pretty interesting things that happen when you lose kind of a key node in the network. If that person is super influential or super well connected, and there's another person who's connected to that person and kind of only to that person. Imagine are really tight with this leader and that leader is really influential at the company. And so you have influence via that person. Then that leader leaves. Now you've lost all of your influence and now you probably become a turnover risk.
Right.
So there are some really interesting things that you can look at over time from network graphs and network analysis. I really nerd out about this kind of thing.
Um, I could really nerd out about it too. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so intriguing to me to think about the people side and how important those relationships are and how important it is to feel that sense of belonging. So thank you for the work that you do. I think it's really cool. And I also think it's really important for all of the reasons that we've talked about. And we are just out of time, but I want to know, last question, what is giving you hope these days?
I think like the general trend that we are on is a good one, not just at work, but like in the world. It feels like
Mhm.
over the past few years, people have kind of woken up a bit and stopped thinking in sort of an individual way of just me and how are the decisions I'm going to make affecting me? How is my work affecting me? But also like, what about everybody else? And what about people that don't have the things that I have and don't have the privileges I do? And I find it, yeah, I find it like hopeful that people are on this trend of caring about others and building community
Mhm.
in a way that I don't know if everyone was pre-pandemic even.
Mhm.
It does feel like people care about others more than they have in the past, and they want to connect and they want to build community, which is great. And I hope that continues more and more. And people take care of each other.
I love that thought. And we're going to end there. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.